few minutes. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. And I hope everybody enjoyed the coffee break and had the opportunity to get a coffee and some food. And it's great to have you all back here now for the next session. So the next session at the event is going to be focusing on WRC-23. So it's something that's obviously been raised in a number of the presentations so far, in Mario's presentation, but also more broadly in that first session. And we're delighted to now have a panel focusing specifically on that. So we have some speakers here in person, and we have others joining us virtually. And to explain more and to introduce the speakers and the issues, it's my pleasure to now pass over to Kezius Mwale, the Radio Communications Coordinator at ATU. Kezius, welcome, and over to you.
So thank you very much, Dan. I hope you got some extra energy, small time to refuel. So welcome back. So yes, now it is WRC-23, looking at the progress, challenges, and opportunities for our region. And before I proceed, I observe protocol. So it's the minister and other senior government officials we may have here, and as well as virtual, those coming from South Africa, as well as the ICASA leadership, and of course, my very own boss, the ATU Secretary General, Mr. John Omo. Also, I've seen a number of my mentors, personal mentors. I pay my respects to you. Now, if you remember, nearly all of the keynote speakers spoke of the WRC opportunity. Yes, and because in my view, this may be a personal view, WRCs are indeed the brain and heart of the radio spectrum. On one hand, the brain, because WRCs sometimes can be very logical, yeah, but also the heart, because if you participated in WRCs, you know that at one point, it is more than logic. It is more than logic. Sometimes the WRC invokes its heart to decide on major decisions by way of compromise and consensus. In any case, whether you believe that WRCs are a brain or the heart and either one of them, in any case, WRCs have such a lasting impact, and therefore it is only befitting that we discuss them. Also remembering that indeed our keynote speakers, all of them cited the WRC opportunity. Hence this session. Now, as we progress, I wish to provide to you the outline for this session. Number one, we will have the general introduction, and I'm doing exactly that. Following my small remarks, we will have Mr. Brahman Eohaja. In this case, of course, Mr. Brahman, if you know him, is many things, many things. But in this case, he'll be speaking as the chairman of our R2 working group on fixed and mobile services for WRC-23. He will provide an overview of first, the outcome of our last preparatory meeting held in my home country, Lusaka. We dubbed that one APM 23. He'll be bringing the context of the draft CPM text, as well as trying to answer some of the bullet points, some of the questions that you find in the session outline. After him, we will have Mr. Sereu, who will do a similar thing, but focusing on Agenda 1.1. And then we will have the panelists, one after the other, sort of providing their opening thoughts. The order will be Mr. Linden, followed by Dr. Shiv, and then Mr. Ross, and then Dr. Sami. And then segment 3, we will go into general discussion of the packages, and then question and answer. And therefore, it is my singular honor now to invite Mr. Dramani Ohaja to provide to you his overview. Welcome.
Thank you, Cassius, and greetings to all the participants to this conference, whether they are sitting in this room or they are attending online. So as Cassius said, I am the chair of the WRC-23 Working Group 1A that deals with the issue which are related to the mobile broadband. So therefore, as you are all aware, WRC will address several items. We have more than 33 issues that are on the agenda of the WRC. So it means that if we have to go through all these items, it will not be able to do that due to the time constraint we have for this session. So therefore, when preparing the session today, we've agreed that we would only concentrate on some of the issues for the WRC, and mainly some of the issues which are related to the future development of mobile broadband in Africa. And amongst those topics, there are some which we could call as hot topics because they are more contentious. And for amongst those topics, we have agenda item 1.2. 1.2 that will deal with some of the frequency band in the mid-range, the 3.3 to 3.4 gig or 3.6 to 3.8 gig. This is more related to region 2. But we have also the upper part for the 6 gigahertz band, which is going for the 6425 to 7100 to 25 meg. And we have also the 10 gig, but for the 10 gig, it is limited only to region 2. We have also agenda item 1.3. Agenda item 1.3 is going to look at the possible primary allocation for the 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz to the mobile service in region 1 and take the appropriate regulatory actions. And we have also the agenda item 1.5. Agenda item 1.5 is related to the review of the spectrum use and the spectrum needs of existing service in the frequency band for 170 to 916 megahertz in region 1. And I will start by providing you our latest position in Africa based on the result of the APM 23. But before going into the result of our last APM meeting, I would just give some background information regarding the mobile development in our continent and the main consideration we have about this. And we also we are all aware of the fact that mobile broadband activity in the next decade is expected to focus on the launch and development of IMT 2020 systems, commonly known as 5G systems. And 4G will continue to develop in the 2020s, and it is expected that by mid of by 2025, we will have a more broad launch of 5G systems. And those figures are available in the latest report, which has been provided by the GSMA, because they are always providing some insight about the development of the mobile communication in different regions around the world, specifically regarding sub-Saharan Africa. And from the different studies which had been carried out in ITU and even the different debate that we are having in the radio communication community, it is clear that it's well recognized that the demand for mobile data is rising rapidly, and mobile operators have a growing need for spectrums. So therefore, there's a need to look at the possibility of identifying more spectrum for the IMT, and having due regard to the particular situation in the African continent, the needs is mainly focused now on the low and mid-range frequency band. So that's why, for example, there is much interest regarding the issues around agenda item 1.2, 1.3, and 1.5. So what's the current status of the discussion regarding agenda item 1.2? Just to recall, for agenda item 2, the two main frequency band of interest for Africa is the 3 GHz band, so the C band, as we call it generally, 3.3 to 2.4 gig. And also for the 6 gig, we have the 6425 to 7125 megahertz. So that is the range of interest for the continent on the agenda item 1.1. So currently the situation regarding the 3.3 to 3.4 is that there are about 33 countries which already have this band identified for IMT in the radio regulation through footnote 5.429b. But the footnote concerns stringent condition. For example, there is a geographical limitation. It means that it is limited to administration side of the 30 degrees parallel north. So it excludes some of the countries, especially those from the northern part of the continent. And we have also another condition which finally gave a secondary status for IMT with regard to the radio location services, because the IMT should not cause harmful interference to or claim protection from the systems in the radio location service. And there is the third condition is that for administration to implement an IMT systems, there is an explicit agreement which is needed from the neighboring countries. So those factors are limiting the possible deployment of IMT in that frequency band. So therefore, the agenda will look at the possibility of amending this footnote in order to review the existing condition. From the studies which have been carried out for this band, first of all, we have the first set of studies which are been carried out during the previous WRC cycle. And there are also new studies which were submitted from this WRC-23 cycle. And most of these studies were trying to assess the potential interference caused by IMT to different types of radar systems. And from the results, it can be seen that separation distance will be required, and some of the range have been provided. For example, range may be up to 150 kilometers for the land and ship-based radars, whereas for the airborne radars, we could have separation distance which can be larger for up to 519 kilometers. And still, there is no common conclusion regarding the result of the studies. So therefore, views were expressed into the draft CPM text regarding the result of the studies, and therefore those who are interested can have a look at those views. But ultimately, Some of the methods have been developed and included in the draft CPM text with regard to these frequency bands, and they are ranging from no change or proposal for modification of the existing two footnotes, 5.429A and 5.429B, to just to add the interest countries of Region 1 while maintaining the current restriction. Another method is proposing that there should be a modification of the existing footnotes with the possibility of relaxing the condition that are included in those footnotes. And the third method is proposing that we should go straight to the primary allocation included in the table of allocation and identification of the band for IMT. We should bear in mind the fact that the resolution specifically for Region 1 is giving an indication that for Region 1 it should be limited only to amending the existing footnotes. And now the next frequency band is the 6 GHz band, and we all know that for this band, the frequency band was initially proposed by the African countries during the WRC-19. And part of this frequency range is allocated to the FSS uplink, and it is subject to the provision of the Appendix 30B. And the survey that has been carried out by ATU regarding the usage of this band shows that in almost all the countries, the current use of this band is for FS link, and in some countries also it is widely used for FSS uplink. Regarding the result of the studies, the main challenge here is about the sharing between the IMT and the FSS uplink. For the other services, the conclusion is that there is sharing is feasible, but for some of the studies, there is a need to have some kind of, for example, the sharing between the FS and the IMT, there is a need to have a separation distance, and it should be coordinated based on the side-by-side situation. And therefore, for the FSS, which is the most challenging issues, several studies have been carried out. Some of them are concluding that the sharing is feasible, but for others, they have indicated that the sharing is not feasible. So therefore, there is a need to have a careful consideration on the assumption which were used for the different studies to make your own decision regarding that. But overall, as methods which have been proposed for this frequency band, we have 5 methods in the draft CPM text as provided by the ITUR responsible group, starting from the no change, or the possibility of having the identification through a footnote, but without condition. And other methods are proposing that we could have identification through a new footnote, but with some condition regarding that will address the protection of the other services. Conditions should apply maybe to all the services which are existing services which we have now, or it could be limited only to certain services. Currently, what are the position from ATU regarding those 2 bands? For the 3 gigahertz bands, the proposal, the position from Africa is that we support the removal of the stringent condition through the amendment of the existing footnotes. And also, we are encouraging other African administrations which are not yet listed in the existing footnote also to include, to submit a proposal at the next conference to have the names included in those footnotes. And we do not also support any method that will result in maintaining the current regulatory situation. So that means that the method which is proposing that we should maintain the existing condition in the footnotes is not supported as a common position for Africa. And for the 6 gigahertz band, there is a preliminary support for identification of the whole band for IMT, taking into account the result of the studies. And we should also look out at the appropriate measure to ensure the protection of the existing services, taking into account also the result of the coexistence studies. For agenda item 1.3, that deals with the 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz. Also, the issue here is that this band is used for the FSS downlink. So we have the same situation of taking into account the existing service where we would like to extend the allocation to the mobile services. So here also, different views in the CPM text were expressed regarding as whether or not the possible identification of the band for IMT is included into the agenda, because currently the agenda called for raising the status of the allocation to mobile services in this band to primary. Now, whether it is possible to extend it to IMT or not, it's still a debate regarding this agenda item. When looking at the methods, we have 4 methods which have been proposed for these agenda items. Some of them are just proposing that we could have an upgrade to the allocation to the mobile, except aeronautical mobile service on a primary basis within Region 1 without condition. Some other methods also are proposing that upgrade should be made with some regulatory and or technical condition. And for this method, we have also several alternatives which have been proposed there. And we have also another option which goes for the upgrade of the status for the allocation to primary, but also along with the identification for IMT. So for the African groups, what our position? Our current position is to support the upgrade of mobile services, except aeronautical, to primary allocation. Then we support also having measures to protect the existing services, and we also supporting the identification of this band for IMT. But currently, there is no decision which has been made on the appropriate method. For agenda item 1.5, I think the director of the BR has addressed this issue in his opening remarks. It's still contentious. And even in our continent, we do not have any common position regarding the agenda item 1.5. So therefore, currently the result of our discussion in the group was that we will defer the final decision regarding our preliminary position to the last APM. And in the meantime, we hope that consultation will be held between the concerned administration to try as much as possible to reconcile the position. So, to wrap up, for agenda item 1.1 and 1.3, we seem to have a kind of consensus that is emerging in our African common position, but this is not the case for agenda item 1.5. For agenda item 1.3, also the African preliminary position is comparable to the trends that we are seeing in CEPT, because we all know that in CEPT, for example, in some countries within CEPT, this band is already used for mobile application, especially for IMT. For agenda item 1.2, there are still divergences in the whole region. For example, for the 3 GHz band, we are aware of the fact that CPT is not in favor of having any modification to the existing condition that we have in the footnote. So it means that there is need to have more engagement regarding that aspect. For the 6 GHz band, CPT and ASMG have not yet defined their position. So there is still a room to have an evolution regarding that aspect. And for agenda item 1.5, it is clear that there is still work to do in order to reconcile the different views with the other regional organizations. And we should also have in mind the fact that for all these agenda items, even within the continent, there are still discussions that are going to be held, because for some of the issues regarding the C band and also the UHF band, there is not really all administration who are in the same line. So we need to have further discussion, further review of the result of the studies to make our final decision at the APM 23-4. So with that, it concludes my opening remarks that has set the scene for the discussion. Thank you all.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Brahman. Now, Mr. Brahman needed to take only 15 minutes. He's done double, so I don't know. We hope to catch up with time, but well done, well done. So let's go to Mr. Serewu. I'm told Mr. Serewu will be online. Now, may I beg with you to use your experience to give us some time. Mr. Serewu, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
In this case, Mr. Serewu will be speaking as the ATU Task Group Chair for Emerging Technologies.
Yes, thank you, Kezias, and greetings to colleagues in Cape Town and greetings to those online. Allow me to ride on protocol as already established. So I'm going to present on agenda item 1.1, which is also on IMT spectrum. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so I believe I'm preaching to the converted, and we all know what agenda item 1.1 is about. It is about setting proper conditions for the coexistence, or whatever we may want to call it, between IMT in the band 4800 to 4990 megahertz, and also AMS and MMS systems operating in the same band, but in international waters and airspace. Can we move to the next band? So working parties that were responsible for this work are Working Party 5B, which would provide characteristics for the protection of aeronautical and maritime systems. And then Working Party 5D would conduct the studies in collaboration with Working Party 5B. And Working Party 5D would finalize the CPM text and the reports, if any. We can move to the next slide. So that being the case, it is pleasing to note that at its last meeting, 5D managed to deliver on two major items under this agenda. First, it concluded or wrapped up its work on materials in support of agenda item 1.1. By so doing, it discontinued the work on the earlier on envisaged report on the 4800 to 4990 megahertz, that is with respect to IMT. So this text is now available as an attachment, Annex 4.8 to the chairman's report, which is 5D document 1555. And CPM text was also worked on and concluded, and that text is available in Annex 4.7 to the same chairman's report. We can move to the next. So there are quite a number of considerations that need to be highlighted. As colleagues will realize as you go through the output of this work, or the output of the work done by 5D and 5B on agenda item 1.1, there is need for administrations to properly look at the application of Article 8 and the status of stations operating in the so-called international waters and airspace. Associated with that, you will realize, particularly in the views expressed on methods, that there is some strong debate on the application of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, whether that applies or whether that should be taken into consideration by the ITU, in particular WRC, as it decides on the fate of stations operating in international waters and seas. The same UNCLOS defines what it calls the exclusive economic zone, which sort of extends to up to about 360 kilometers into the sea. So the questions as to whether coastal states have full rights over that or jurisdiction over that territory will be also a matter of debate, although some would not want to discuss that. The other issues relate to the distance at which the PFD should be set, if we agree on setting a PFD. Is it at 22 kilometers, which we have used previously, or it's at the edge of the exclusive economic zone of the coastal state? And there's also issues around resource 5 of the establishing resolution, which is resolution 223. Resource 5 provides an exemption list for which the PFD limit doesn't apply. So as you realize, there are methods which are saying, let's delete resource 5, and there are methods which say countries into resolution, into resource 5. We can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, we will have an interesting time at CPM2 as we try to reconcile some of these methods. Together, there are 8 methods. I'm sorry, on my slide, I missed out on method H. So the methods range from no change at all to no protection of systems operating in international waters and airspace. I do believe that the solution really lies somewhere within method C, because what we're looking for is more of a compromise and a regulatory compromise for that matter. Technically, there isn't much you can do, but I'm quite hopeful that a solution will be found. So it is important for Africa to look at these things in detail, to look at the studies in detail, and also perhaps to convene before CPM so that we can optimize or streamline the methods, because some of them look a bit duplicative from my reading. We can go to the next slide. So ATU has established its preliminary position on agenda item 1.1, and that I will not go into much detail, but really ATU is looking for more relaxed conditions for the band so that IMT can flourish. It is an important band for Africa because the systems that are operated in international waters and airspace are rarely, if any, used within Africa. So as a continent, I think from what adding to what the Secretary General has said, there is value in this, but where is the value going? Are we enjoying or benefiting from the value of that spectrum, or we are just losing it? We can go to the next slide. So at the next WRC, at WRC, it is important for administrations to consider joining the footnote, and also to seriously consider this as an important agenda item to provide spectrum for IMT, and perhaps to help us dealing with other agenda items which are more contentious. Thank you very much, moderator.
So thank you, Mr. Sereu. So method C, that's what Mr. Sereu may recommend for our region and hopefully also for the world, if that is applicable on agenda 1.1. So let's go to someone who represents the satellite industry in this instance, the senior consultant for Africa, no other than Mr. Linden. 4 or 5 minutes, we'll be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cassius. And yeah, as you heard from my friend Abdul Rahman, there are 23 agenda items, and I must now do them in 3 or 4 minutes. It's going to be a bit of a challenge. However, before I start, I'd just like to talk a little bit about GESOA. We are a global satellite operators association. It's an industry association. Many of you may be more familiar with it as ESOA, the European, Middle East and Africa Satellite Operators Association, but at the beginning of this year we went global. You will see on the slide there are a couple of African satellite operators amongst our members, but we would, of course, be looking for more satellite operators from Africa. In particular, we know that Angola has a communication satellite. We would welcome any other satellite operators from Africa to join the association. Very briefly, there are 2 broad categories of agenda items at WRC that are relevant to satellite. These are the protection of the existing satellite bands from other services, particularly agenda item 1.2, 1.3. Then there are also 2 topics which aren't agenda items per se, but which will feed into the report of the Director of the Radio Communication Bureau at WRC. The first one being topic 9.1c, which deals with the use of IMT technologies in the bands of the fixed service. And this is all fixed service frequency bands. There are no specific bands that have been identified for this. The other issue is Radio Regulation 21.5, which deals with the protection of satellite receivers from interference caused by terrestrial systems. The second category of service deals with the enhancement of the existing satellite bands. Here we're looking at agenda item 1.8, which deals with CNPC links for unmanned aircraft systems within the FSS frequency allocations. This is purely an application within the FSS, but there are some issues there concerning responsibilities of ICAO for safety of life operations and where ICAO and the ITU's jurisdictions begin and end. Then issues that have been discussed previously are earth stations in motion, both in the GSO and non-GSO orbits and in the KU and KA bands. 117, very important, satellite to satellite links in the KU and KA bands. At first glance, this might be seen to be not of too much importance to Africa, but once one starts digging into the applications, there are a lot of African administrations that are using Earth observation satellites, and this will facilitate the transfer of data for Earth observation satellites. And then finally, the standing agenda item 7, which deals with the improvements to satellite regulatory procedures. Looking at agenda items 1.2 and 1.3, and my friend Abdul Rahman has laid a lot of the groundwork for us here, in that many of the African countries rely heavily on C-band satellite services, and these cannot be duplicated in other frequency bands due to the specific characteristics of the C-band, wide area coverage, rain fade issues, etc., etc. And what we have seen is that studies have shown that compatibility between FSS and IMT or mobile services are not feasible in the same geographic area. Separation distances are needed to do this. There have been studies conducted in Working Party 5D of the ITU, which have shown various separation distances ranging from 1 or 2 kilometers up to hundreds of kilometers. And these discrepancies are essentially based on the assumptions on the input parameters. So one needs to be very careful about this. The other issue is that we believe that there must be consistency across agenda items. One cannot call for the protection of the Appendix 30B FSS plan for agenda item 7 in some of the topics there, and then agree to the introduction of IMT in the Appendix 30B feeder links in agenda item 1.2. Sorry. Now, the other issue is based on these. I also cannot agree with my friend Abdur Rahman that there's consensus within the African region on a common position for agenda item 1.2 and 1.3. On agenda item 1.3, GISOA is very strongly of the view that the identification of the 3.6 to 3.8 gig band for IMT is not within the scope of the agenda item. If it were, this item would have been dealt with under Working Party 5D and not under 5A. So we strongly support a position of no change for both agenda items 1.2, 1.3 at WRC-23. FSS is an important technology for Africa. We have heard this morning about the lack of connectivity. FSS can provide rural connectivity to Africa. The mobile sector has openly declared that C-band will not be used to provide IMT services in rural areas. It will be used in the urban areas only. This is not where Africa's connectivity problem lies. We need to provide connectivity to the rural areas, and satellite is one method of achieving this. C-band IMT is going to do nothing for African connectivity in rural areas. With that, I thank you.
So as you can tell, I really regard Mr. Linden as one of my mentors, and to stop him, this is impossible. So please bear with me. So let us now go to one of our two panelists who represent the mobile industry. This one is no other than Dr. Shiv Baksh from Ericsson, the Vice President for Industrial Relations. So Dr. Shiv, over to you. I hope it is not too early. Welcome.
Thank you, KZS. No, it is not particularly too early. It's about 6:15 here. Okay. It's good to see many of you on the screen, at least. And I wanted to start by first thanking Abdur Rahman and Baxton for laying out the issues in great detail. By the way, I just wanted to make a comment. The picture that you see is Ericsson headquarters in Kista, Stockholm neighborhood. And I just thought it looked nice. Moving on, next slide. So what I did was, since Abdur Rahman and Baxton laid out the issues in great detail, I did not want to rehash any of that. And I wanted to sort of rather focus on why the upgrade to primary mobile status and IMT identification is of interest to the mobile sector. Part of it is harmonization, um, and that is a very important part of it. The point we would like to make is that the 3.5 gigahertz band is already the pioneering band for 5G services. More than 200 plus operators have already licensed or deployed or are deploying 5G services in 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz band. And there are more than 1,500 devices which support bands N78 and N77. Uh, with respect to 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz, the the positive thing about it and why we are seeking that identification and that upgrade is it allows for contiguous spectrum for operators. And these large blocks, because they would require fewer base stations, what is called BTS, can reduce the cost per bit and thereby boost affordability and improve performance. With respect to the point that my friend Lyndon was making regarding expansive use, a system house study found that actual utilization of C-band satellites downlink capacity in Africa is only around 60%. And they studied and they found that it was possible to move users in 12 satellites from the 3.6, 3.8 gigahertz to channels above 3.8 with minimal technical disruption. Um, and further, that the use is not ubiquitous in the sense that there is no direct to home television in this band and the consumer use is marginal. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. No, you went one too fast. Aha, there you go. Thank you. With reference to the 6 gigahertz, um, our interest is because it ideally is suited to meet 5G future capacity needs. The 3.5 gigahertz band might not be sufficient in the longer run. And we are not deciding things only for immediate use, but we are planning stuff so that we can do things sensibly over time. And the 6 gigahertz bands offers complementary capacity to 3.5 gigahertz in the same macro cell grid. Um, it affords large contiguous blocks for supporting 5G services with potential for economies of scale, as I mentioned, in the macro environment. Like the 3 gigahertz band, it provides good balance between coverage and capacity, and the small gap in uplink downlink coverage can be mitigated. The small gap between 3.5 and 6 gigahertz can be mitigated by base station architecture and enhancement of the user equipment. The very contentious issue of UHF. I just want to sort of say first that I trained as a journalist and I worked as a journalist across continents for about a decade and a half. I am an old man, by the way, for those of you wondering. And I am going to be very careful and very respectful of broadcasting and its importance in any society. Given that, with that recognition, I wanted to point out that the reason we are asking for this review and asking for IMT in this band in the 614 or 617 to 698 part of the UHF band is because it will provide capacity expansion for IMT, and that will help lower the digital divide. Band 71 and N71 are widely supported today in infrastructure and in terminals. They can allow for immediate cost-efficient deployments of wide area 4G and 5G networks. And the administrations are invited to consider this range from a long-term perspective, since there is not going to be another near-term opportunity to consider this band in WRC that we can see, right? Moving on, next slide. So what are the challenges and what are the ways forward? The challenge, of course, is that there are sharing studies and their assessment which are important for all bands. As I said, we recognize the importance of broadcasting, and there needs to be an agreement on FSS uplink protection at the ITU level, given that it is a global issue. With respect to the UHF band, as I said, we are looking to allow administrations the flexibility to deal with and decide whether or not to use mobile and at what point to use mobile. And it matches the region 1 up to the rest of the world. With respect to IMT and FSS coexistence, there are a lot of studies. And for instance, in the CPM report, we looked at that if you consider global beams, 11 of the 16 studies found that the sharing is feasible. Similarly, for hemi beams, 5 of 8. For zonal beams, all 5. And for spot beams, 3 out of 6. The outcomes of the study, as we all recognize, differ owing to the different sets of assumptions, principally pertaining to RARB in the ITUR studies, the issue of base station density in rural environment, and the issue of clutter loss, etc. While FSS links need to be protected, we should shy away, I believe, from overprotection, and administrations must assess the studies and evaluate if the underlying assumptions are realistic. Thank you. With that, I'll conclude and hand it back to you, Kezius.
Thank you. You asked.
Thank you for allowing a minute more or two.
2 3 minutes. Oh, you are going to sponsor lunch, Erickson. So thank you, Dr. Shiv. So please keep all this. I hope you manage to keep all this information coming on your way. And then at the end, you'll be allowed to ask 1 or 2 questions. So now let us hear from Ross. Mr. Ross is the special advisor at the GSMA, a very familiar face, I hope, to many of us. So Ross, if you are hearing us, the floor is yours. Please, 4 or 5 minutes. Otherwise, you sponsor dinner. Thank you. Welcome.
Good day to everybody, and thank you for having me today in this honored group. Today I want to talk about our vision for connectivity and how the GSMA believes that mobile should be in the hands of all people, whoever and wherever, delivering growth and raising productivity. We need WRC-23 to help close the broadband usage gap. In the words of one famous son of Africa that I've put on that page, we don't turn back, we leave no one behind, and we pull each other up. Next slide, please. So digital literacy and affordability are for sure the biggest barriers to broadband take-up. Here, digital literacy is relevant to us in spectrum, maybe not directly perhaps, but let's be honest, if you're teaching someone to dig, it's tough to do it if the spade doesn't have a handle. Affordability is directly related to spectrum, and we'll talk about more of that later. When spectrum is constrained, it raises capex, and with this, consumer costs. Quality and speed are lost, and take-up is reduced as quality and as the quality drops and costs rise. We did some studies on the impact of 5G use reduction if just mid-band spectrum is constrained to today's level earlier this year. And on a global basis, 40% of the productivity gains of 5G will be lost if mid-band is constrained to today's levels. But the good news is we have the tools that we've been hearing about from many people today already that I've listed on the other side of this slide to make sure that we use WRC-23 to take away those constraints, make sure we have enough low band and mid-band spectrum to ensure that 5G can be put into the hands of everybody. Next slide, please. Why does what we do impact affordability? Well, I hope this is probably clear to all of you by now, but I wanted to put the slide in to make it clear. The channel sizes we use impact the network density. If we move from 100 megahertz channel in 3.5 gigahertz, using that range as an example, to 60 megahertz channels, that means a 64% increase in cell size. There's a network capex saving across Africa that is significant as a result, but the consumer impact and how much consumer take-up is impacted by that additional capex is also an important feature. If we go to the next slide, please. We heard earlier from Iman about the large number of people living in rural areas in Africa. In South Africa, it's 30%. In other areas, it's higher, in fact. These people need low band frequencies, and the quality of their service is directly related to how much spectrum they can get. If we put 600 megahertz on top of the available 9, 8, and 700 megahertz spectrum available to people in this region, that'll be a 37% increase in the potential download speed. Low band is difficult in this region, I know, but the benefits of it are stronger than anywhere else in the world. Next slide, please. So I think we have a few clear WRC questions in Africa. We have the low band paradox that I was just talking about. More Africans need low band spectrum than any other region in the world, and yet Africa has the newest DTT, and governments often find this decision the hardest. How do we plan our networks into a cleaner and greener future? Are we going to just densify? And what's the carbon impact of that? What's the cost impact of that? How can macro cell mobile help targets, climate targets, if we don't have spectrum? If we can't have enough quality to ensure that people aren't driving to meetings, how do we ensure that that happens? Third question, is Africa competitive? You've seen people in other regions with significant moves, significant roadmaps towards spectrum allocations. And the question Africa needs to ask is, do you want the same as them? And if so, do you need to do the same spectrum assignments as highly industrialized countries? So I started with a son of Africa, and I'll close with a quote from the father of the nation. I left this quote, the first half of this quote, as I thought considerable amount of thought certainly seems to apply to our long WRC process. But I mainly wanted to talk about the second part. We always hear the problems of the growth of mobile causes, the worries, sorry, I'm timing myself. That means I'm up 30 more seconds. We always think of the problems mobiles causes, the growth of mobile, the worries about the sharing studies, the difficulties finding new uses for spectrum. And for sure, you'll hear tales of woe here today. But for WRC-23, the sharing study period is over and it's time to look at the future. So let's move forward with hope and optimism. Let's look forward to a time that 5G can connect doctors, teachers, friends, loved ones all over the world and throughout the whole of Africa. With the right spectrum at WRC-23, 5G can benefit billions of people all over the world. And I'll leave you with those thoughts. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Ross. At this point, I cannot help but remark and say that now you see the, I don't know where distinguished Mr. Zimri is sitting, the head of spectrum management at the CASA. So you can see clearly that his seat is a hot one. Each one of them who have spoken very passionate, saying it is them that they should be looked upon with favor in terms of spectrum allocation and assignment and all this. So I hope Mr. Zimri is justified to be flying in a chartered plane. All right, very, very hot seat. So then let's go to the broadcasting sector. That would be represented by Dr. Sami. In this case, is Senior Project Manager at the European Broadcasting Union. Dr. Sami, welcome. Again, may I appeal to you for 5 minutes as agreed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, KCS. I will do my best. Thank you and good day to all. As Abdurrahman mentioned, the studies for agenda item in task group 6.1 for agenda item 1.5, which is the most important agenda item for broadcasters. Region 1 have completed its work. Now it's time for good decisions. So my two next slides will be on agenda item 1.5, and the third one on the other related agenda items of relevance for broadcasting. Here you will see that the three sister unions of broadcasters in Region 1, the AUB in Africa, the ASBU in Arab countries, and the EBU in Europe, they all agree that after the release of two portions of the UHF spectrum, the 700 and the 800 MHz band, representing 40% of the band, 470 to 862, and after intensive replanning and costly replanning of the sub-700 MHz band, including in Africa, and after and while the investment is still ongoing in Africa on DTT, it's really necessary not to change the regulatory conditions in the sub-700 MHz band. You have the links here to the different positions. Next slide, please. Now the question is no change a realistic outcome of WRC-23 on agenda item 1.5? We think that yes, it is, and there are three reasons for this. The first one, the title is taken from an ATU statement, A2 statement that you can find in the slides of Abdurrahman. The frequency band for 7694 MHz is vital for broadcasting. The second is that mobile has got enough spectrum, including below 1 GHz. And the third is that sharing between IMT and DCB is difficult. The first one, broadcasting is offering free-to-air services, bridging digital dividend, supporting national cultures and social cohesion. It's resilient in emergency situations, and there are other benefits. It is required by majority of Region 1 and African countries, according to the ITU survey. You see the pie chart. More than 95% of the respondents to this ITU survey, which were about 106 out of 122 countries, they claim at least keeping the whole band for 7694 MHz, which is 224 MHz for broadcasting. And the band is also vital for PMSC applications. These are radio microphones used for program production, for live performances, including cultural, political, religious, and community events. And they don't have other solutions for the same quality of service which is offered now. Now, mobile has got enough spectrum, including below 1 GHz. If you look to the pie chart, you see that the current allocation and use of the sub-700 MHz band is quite balanced. In fact, with some favor for mobile, a bit of favor for mobile. So one of the considerations of A2 is to have a balanced use of the spectrum below 1 GHz. It is, in fact, the case so far. And not mentioning that actually the current allocation to broadcasting below 1 GHz are not yet used by mobile as it should be, especially in the 700 and 800 MHz band, where it is not yet well used, in fact, in many African countries. The sharing between IMT and DCB is difficult. We have real cases of interference occurred in the 700 and 800 MHz bands. It is not the case in Africa because there was no DTT in Africa in these bands. They were not deployed. DTT were not deployed in these bands to have these cases. There is a need for large separation distances, and this would limit the flexible use, which is promoted by some stakeholders, saying that one country can use the band for mobile, the other for broadcasting, but these large differences will limit this flexibility. Next slide, please. On the other WRC-23 agenda items of interest, we mentioned 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4, but for these agenda items, the positions of broadcasting is that existing broadcasting use should be protected. So we have just this requirement, and for the topic 9.1c, we consider that this should be addressed by ITU study groups, and there should be no change in the regulatory conditions in WRC. Thank you very much.
So, well done, Dr. Sami, for helping us sticking to time. Thank you, Dan. Thank you. So now, if you remember, when I was outlining the session outlook, I said that we would have segment 3 dedicated to general discussion amongst our distinguished panelists. I'm afraid that may not happen because the minister has to address this forum in the next 10 minutes. And therefore, is that correct, Dan? In the next 15 minutes. Okay, thank you. In any case, we may not have this general discussion amongst the panelists anymore. Rather, may I invite the audience to inquire of our distinguished panelists why they passionately appealed to spectrum managers across the world to decide in their favor. So the floor is open, both the people in physical attendance as well as virtual. So please, thank you. So your name and affiliation, and then you go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for an interesting panel. My name is Hazem Mawakit. I'm with Intelsat. I have a couple of questions. The economic studies that we see a lot of these days, and we see a lot of huge numbers, you know, in the billions. And I wonder to what degree do we have faith in these economic studies, you know, because they throw in numbers, 10 billion, 5 billion, 3 billion. And then it's like, I might as well can throw any number and put it on a study and say, well, you know, how true are these numbers and are they ever validated? That's one point. The other point is about this incessant need for additional spectrum for mobile, and which never stops every WRC, and which makes me reflect on whatever happened with the progress with the millimeter wave, which was a really big issue in WRC-15. A tremendous amount of spectrum was allocated, right? And it was a do or die at the time. And now it has all faded. You know, we don't hear about millimeter wave anymore. So, but now we need more spectrum. So it kind of questions, it raises to me an issue of credibility about those needs and demands that the mobile industry talks about all the time. You know, so just food for thought. Thank you.
So I suppose those were two. So as others, perhaps, yeah. So let's take this. Then we will try to answer.
My name is Nicholas Jatta. I'm from the Gambia. I noted in the presentation of Ms. Abrahman that he said that agenda item 1 focuses on certain frequencies, and he omitted the 3.5 to 3.6. I just wanted to know why. Is it because they are not actually they do not have stringent conditions or what? So I just want to know 3.5 because it's part of the spectrum that we are looking forward to deploy our 5G networks on. Thank you.
Any preference as to who you wish to answer that? Is that Mr. Abdraman? Oh, great. Okay. So maybe that is simpler. So Mr. Abdraman.
So the issue about
come back on the question, please, very quickly. Mr. Abdraman did. Wait. On the mic.
On agenda item 1.2, you mentioned 3.3 to 3.4, then 3.6 to 3.8. You deliberately jumped 3.5 to 3.6. So I just wanted to know the rationale.
Why is that? That's the case. Yeah. Please go ahead, Mr. Brahman, to answer that.
Thank you. I think when I've listed the ban, I listed all the ban which are under consideration for agenda item 1.2, but depending on the region, because not all the ban are considered for all the regions. So For example, 3.6 to 3.8 is only for region 2. It's not considered for region 1. Region 1, we have the 1.3 that address the primary allocation, raising the status of the current status for this allocation to primary for region 1, but it's not dealing with the issue of identification of the band for IMT. So,
okay. So thank you very much. I hope that satisfies the Gambia. I can see the Gambia nodding, which is good. Now let's go to the first set of questions, 2 of them from Intelsat, really asking why does the mobile industry continue to seek additional spectrum when, for example, in WRC-19, it was give us the millimeter wave, we are not going to bother you anymore, okay? So WRC-19 said, okay, we will not bother you anymore, here's your millimeter wave, but they are coming back. So that is for you, Dr. Shiv, and my friend Ross. Dr. Shiv first, like 1 minute.
Yes. There are 2 things. The first question actually you overlooked, which was about the numbers. And I worked as an analyst, and I can tell you something about these numbers. It is very difficult to sort of do anything with any particular degree of accuracy. So why 3 billion and why not 3.1 billion is a very, very difficult question to answer. What is important is it roughly and directionally correct? That's what people look for as they build these numbers, right? So that's the answer to the first question. The second one, there are technological advances that take place. The growth of mobile, the interactive communication rather than, say, broadcasting, which is one way, is increasing as more and more people are coming online. So it is not merely a question of more people being added, which puts a pressure on the network, but also they are using the network with more intensity, both in terms of the use, both in terms of time that they spend on it, which in its own way puts the pressure on the network, so therefore greater demand for spectrum. Technological advances make it feasible for us to sort of look at certain possibilities that open up, for which we need more spectrum, which is why the demand keeps coming up.
Okay. Ross? Yes. Sorry, Dr. Shiv.
No, that's all right. It's good. Yeah.
Yes, 1 minute.
Thanks very much. I'll just add to that a little bit. Look, Kezias, the first thing I have to say is that you misunderstood me. My appeal is not to spectrum managers today at all. I think we've continued the sharing study period already. We're talking today about things that affect employment, productivity, and economic growth. These are political issues, and we now need to talk about our vision for connectivity at a political sphere in the last year of the WRC cycle. Regarding the Intelsat questions, yeah, for sure, we talked about millimeter wave in WRC-19. If you haven't heard the GSMA's pitch about mobile needing spectrum across 3 bands, low, mid, and high bands, then I'm very sorry, but I'm also very surprised. We need all of these: millimeter wave for urban hotspots, mid-band for citywide capacity, and then low band for rural connectivity. So we need all 3 of those. And finally, on the analysis, well, Kezias and I have both known each other for a long time, and that means that I've been doing WRCs for a long time. And in fact, the first WRC I met him was 2007. And just before then, economic analysis linking mobile growth to economic development had started to happen. There was a 2006 LSE study that was commissioned by Vodafone. And these have been replicated with very, very clear results ever since. We're very confident, not just at the GSMA, but in other economic modeling houses, of the models that we're using. This, for us, is also linked to our mobile analytics wing, GSMA Intelligence, which knows how many people are using mobiles for what and when, and predicts how many will be doing them in the future. This is a significant research department within the GSMA. So yeah, we're happy with our numbers. Thanks very much for bringing that up. They've been right in the past, and we're confident they're right again. Thank you.
So thank you. Now, Dr. Gwando, yes.
Thank you, KZS, and good morning. Or is it morning or is it afternoon now, maybe? Anyway, I don't know which time.
Never mind.
It's afternoon. Right.
Thank you, Doctor.
Just to, I was looking at the slides presented because when my friend Linda made passionate point, it caught my attention. I just went back to look at the slides presented by Abdurrahman. In particular, the slide 16 of 24, and I think it's very accurate. Abdurrahman presented accurate position of Africa Telecom Union, which is that we all are unanimous, literally. Well, at the meeting, that was the conclusion of the meeting. I wouldn't say unanimity, but at least that's the conclusion of the meeting, that we upgrade 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz to primary, and identification was also one of the points that was definitely correctly captured. So just to put that in proper context, and that the C-band actually doesn't stop at 3.8. I just want to make that clarity. It doesn't stop at 3.8. It extends all the way to 4.2. So there's still additional 400 meg up there. So it's important to have that clarity. That's what I thought I should bring to the fore. But so Abdurrahman is accurate presentation. Thank you.
Sure. I noted that, but as I told you, Mr. Linden happens to be one of my mentors, and therefore, so yes, Mr. Brahman spoke not of his own, but of the work of the APM 23. So that is extremely correct. Now, before we take any question from the audience, I have my own, and I believe this one is extremely important. And because Ross, Dr. Shiv, and Mr. Brahman have spoken, I'm going to direct this question to both Dr. Sami and Mr. Sereu and ask, those that push for change in the UHF speak about flexibility. Do you see this as being possible? Can mobile and broadcasting coexist? So 1 minute each. Let's start with Dr. Sami, and Mr. Sere will conclude. Dr. Sami.
Thank you, Kezias. Thank you for asking this question. This comes back to the results of sharing studies. There are, of course, there is a divergence in the sharing studies. It has group 6.1 for those who followed this. But there is one reality. The reality is that the IMT system is not designed to work in the same band as DTT using high power, high tower. It is not designed for this. It is designed to use one chunk of spectrum only for it. And this is how the 700 and the 800 megahertz band worked. And this is how the 600 megahertz band in North America is done, that the whole region released the 600 megahertz band from broadcasting in order to let the IMT work. The issue is in the sensitivity of the uplink. The uplink in the IMT system cannot support the interference coming from high power, high tower DTT. And this will push out the broadcasting from the band at some time. And I think that in the honest proposals from Ross and from other, they say we want the 600 megahertz band. They don't say we want to share the 600 megahertz band with broadcasting. They say we want the 600 megahertz band for IMT, and this is honest, really. But this means that you have to replan also the sub 600 megahertz band in order to give equitable access to all countries with the remaining spectrum. Thank you.
Mr. Sereo?
Yes, Kezias. Yeah, I think for administrations it's quite a hard sell. Why? Because broadcasting has always been planned on an a priori basis, which means we plan in advance. In the case of Zimbabwe, if I could say, when we were doing broadcast planning, we could see interference going as far as the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I think a lot of replanning will need to be done if we are to resegment the band. I believe we are talking of resegmenting and not existence in the same band. And I'm sure we have issues between neighbors. So we have to be careful with the route that we take. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sareu. I've both good news and not so good news. So the not so good news is that the minister is a bit delayed, which means, and that brings me to the good news, is that we may carry on. So just relax. If you had your belts on, you better go relax. Okay, so I regard that question to be extremely important, and let's speak the wisdom now of Mr. In fact, do we have any burning question? Yeah, Dr. Kwandu. May I not monopolize the thing, Dr. Kwandu, please.
Thank you very much, KZS, for asking very important question. And normally, as regulators, we don't shy away from difficult issues. We face them when they confront us. When Africa Telecommunication commissioned a report, I think we commissioned a work of harmonization of spectrum, sub 1,000 megahertz spectrum. I think around 2014, 2015. We anticipated this problem and discovered in that report that there will be conversation on the use of part of the 600 megahertz, not all of it, part. The reason that issue came up at the time was we're looking at aggregation. How do you get semblance of good speed at the lower, or in the rural communities, in rural areas? If you're using only 10 meg or 15 or 20 meg, the speed you will get is nothing 4G if you go and calculate it properly. You're not going to get that kind of speed. So the only way to get semblance of that speed in these areas, and the way in Africa have more rural communities than other places. So to give them that test of semblance of that speed, that's why we say we aggregate the lower part, take a portion of it, which is from 617, that's about 35 meg duplex there. Not all of it. So all the way to channel 38 or so is going to, or proposed at that time, 2015, I think the report came out officially 2017. But we said that those channels, just top 10 channels, or 9 channels, if I recall exactly, can be used as a duplex arrangement to aggregate with the 700, 800 to give semblance of higher speed. That's the idea. And if you look at what the trend of what has happened today, I mean, I look at when I'm in my hotel today, I wasn't watching, I mean, I think not in a hotel, wherever, I mean, in my house, other places around, people have really not been using DTT as much as people were thinking before. And there is Netflix, there are other means of delivery of these services. And if you're going to deliver the service in rural communities using broadband, again, you may need to increase the speed. So, and this is an option for countries. Countries, we can allocate. When we allocate, it doesn't mean you are forced to decide and give it. No, it's giving countries option and not an obligation to consider use of either one way or another. So I think the given option is not a problem. And I think we need to pay this when it's necessary. We have done so when there were a lot of skepticism on the 800 in 2007. Then Lyndon can remember that. Now it's the reality. Every one of us here is enjoying 4G services. We've done so in 700, and I think it's still necessary, if we're going to get that kind of speed, to do a part, not all, a part of the of that lower part of the band, that is from 617 upwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kwandu. Okay, I guess we may still continue 1 or 2 minutes. I'm not so sure. Oh yeah, 1 or 2 minutes, she says. Let's invite Mr. Linden to just say something. I mean, out of all this, in 30 seconds, what do you make of this?
Thank you, Cassius. There seems to be a perception that IMT is the only vehicle that can provide broadband connectivity. And this is not the case. Technologies have moved on, and we've heard the IMT proponents speaking about this morning. Satellite is ideally placed to provide broadband services in rural areas, particularly in the African context. And let us not look at figures that are quoted in Europe and in Asia and in North America. We are focusing on the African context. In Africa, we have heard the majority of the population is rural. We do not have the supporting infrastructure, roads, power, etc. Satellite comes into its own. There are key frequency bands for satellite, for broadband. We know that these services can be delivered, and we need to look at it. IMT is important. There is no doubt about that, but it is not the only player in town. And as someone said earlier, at each and every WRC since 2007, the mobile community has been asking for more and more and more spectrum. GESOA did a study just recently, and it's available. It's an independent study by LS Telecom, which shows that in certain countries, 50% of the spectrum that has been identified for IMT has not yet been licensed. Why do you keep on asking for more and more spectrum? We heard earlier this morning about efficient use of spectrum. If 50% of the spectrum identified for IMT has not yet been licensed, I would submit to you that there is no requirement for more spectrum for IMT. Thank you.
Oh, Dr. Sami. Please, Dr. Sami.
Thank
1
you.
minute.
Thank you very much for giving me this time. I would go along what Lyndon has just said, and I will report something which is published in the ITU-D 2020 Facts and Figures. In rural Africa, 20% of the population not covered even by 2G, not talking about 3G or 4G, and 78% not covered by the 700 or 800 megahertz band. So the deficiency in broadband in rural area in Africa is not caused by lack of allocation of spectrum. It is due to the lack of investments by the mobile operators to cover these issues with the existing spectrum. So before asking for more spectrum, please use already what you have. And just to finish, just reflect on what Ross mentioned as good citations. I would urge the African administrations not to leave the broadcasting behind, and this is one of the citations mentioned. And as broadcaster, we keep hope and optimism. Thank you very much.
All right. So really to just try to tie all these things together. Mr. Sereu and my brother Abdurrahman, you represent the regulators on this panel. So how do you balance all these passionate appeals How do you balance? Let's start with you, Mr. Sereu, 1 minute.
Yes, thank you, Kezia. Well, I take it these issues are cross-cutting in terms of jurisdictions. So as Africa, we certainly need to have deeper conversations with respect to the agenda items before us. It's decision time and it's difficult decisions that we have to make. But I believe we'll come up with a good decision, having been informed by sessions like this one.
So as a regulator, how would you please all these people? 30 seconds.
Thank you very much, Cassius. So I think each of the previous speakers, either those from the satellite community or even the mobile community or the broadcaster, the statement have their own merits. And I concur with all of them with the fact that we have a challenge, and the challenge has been clearly mentioned this morning by the director of the BIA when he provided us with the latest figures regarding the gap in the connectivity and also in the access. And no one will be left behind, either broadcasting or satellite. I'm sure that the way forward is to work towards a mix of technology to try to follow the gap that we have seen today, and we should look at all the possibility, and one of the possibility is more sharing of spectrum between the different technologies. So I think that's the best way. Thanks.
Okay. So thank you, our panel. We see that the chief guest, the guest of honor, is now arrived. So I defer back to Dan. So please help me thank our panelists. We will be retiring. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Kezius and to all of our panelists who joined both in person and remotely for that discussion on WRC-23, and a discussion I'm sure that's going to continue right up to about this time next year when we're all going to be joining together for WRC in Dubai. So thank you very much to Kezius and all the team for that. So as Kezius said, we are now joined, or we're delighted to be joined by our guest of honor for this year's conference from our host country. So I'd like to now welcome to the stage Charlie Lewis, who is going to introduce the minister. Charlie.
Thank you very much, Dan. And colleagues, delegates, I do apologize that we had to rearrange the program. Unfortunately, international flights have their own law, which is not always in favor of conference proceedings such as this. So we're very delighted to be joined by the Honorable Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni. She's going to be delivering a keynote address in a few minutes. I'm not going to talk for long because I'm standing between you and her, which is not a good place to be. Just to indicate, it's been a very busy year for spectrum in South Africa. We kicked off the year with a successful spectrum auction. We auctioned a goodly chunk of spectrum, raised something in the order of $1 million by selling the spectrum at what we think are reasonably affordable prices. It sounds like a lot of money. And there's a lot of work going on in spectrum in the country at the moment. We are in the process of finalizing a series of spectrum roadmaps. You saw that in one of the panel votes earlier today. We have in process a long-term spectrum outlook. And perhaps most importantly, from the point of view of the address that's about to come to you, the Minister has tabled a draft spectrum policy for discussion and feedback. I haven't seen her speech. I presume it will be mentioned in the speech, but she's going to talk to you about a number of the issues relating to spectrum that sit on her table and are uppermost in the minds of herself, us as the regulator, and obviously her department. So colleagues, friends, colleagues, honorable delegates, I give you Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni to deliver the keynote address. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This podium is very accommodative of some of us. I need to extend my sincere apologies for arriving late. We had to come to Cape Town using a flight that was international, so it was delayed. So as a consequence, we were delayed. So I could not be here at the scheduled time. But imagine if Councillor Lewis is between you and me, and I'm between you and lunch. How do I feel? So to the Secretary General of the African Telecommunications Union, the chairperson of ICASA, Councillor Charles Lewis, distinguished guests, and other councillors of ICASA and the leadership of the ATU, a good afternoon. I know I am between you and lunch, so we'll try to be very brief. And it's always difficult to speak after all the panels have spoken and all the key speakers have spoken. But for us, radio frequency spectrum is a vital element for development of the electronic communications network infrastructure. Due to insufficient allocations, Africa is faced with a shortage and limitations on the availability of spectrum. The relegation of Africa to the periphery of meaningful spectrum allocation is not only detrimental to Africa's development, but it will compromise global development, world peace, and the attainment of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. It is therefore heartwarming to know that this 7th Sub-Saharan Africa Spectrum Management Conference is seized with questions of how to deliver a spectrum strategy that works for Africa. In South Africa, we are finalizing, as Councillor Lewis has indicated, our next generation radio frequency spectrum policy for economic development, which we call the spectrum policy. Without preempting the outcomes of the draft spectrum policy consultation processes, I must indicate that this policy will be at the center of transformation of the ICT sector. Through this policy, South Africa intends to aggressively drive our program of bridging the digital divide through bridging the connectivity divide that is experienced in our rural and peri-urban communities. The policy aims to advance long-term public interest from the use of the spectrum to support the rollout of communication networks for socio-economic development of the country. It further seeks to utilize spectrum to drive broader and inclusive economic participation and development for all. Program Director, we cannot, if we want to succeed as Africa, separate policy and regulatory reforms from business. If we want Africa that deals with poverty, addresses education and health challenges, and create employment and wealth for its people, we need to be flexible and quick to respond to technological changes and innovations that are brought to our shores. We need to start being innovative and develop technologies that will sustain our development as a continent. The availability of spectrum must result not only in the reduction of the cost of communication, it must be an enabler of innovation and wealth creation for any country. We need to build innovation technology hubs, develop and manufacture our products which can be shipped globally. We need to choose strategic partners that will aid and assist us in skills development, not only in this sector, but across the vertical sectors that will be affected by technological advancements. South Africa will launch an artificial intelligence hub towards the end of this month in partnership with academic institutions, the Tshwane University of Technology and the University of Johannesburg, and ICT industry players to harness the economic and social benefits of AI, both in the country and Africa at large. I must explain that we've already extended invitations to our sister countries to nominate universities in their own countries that will serve as centers of excellence for our AI institute or AI hub in the country, because we understand that our development as South Africa is not sufficient, because we can go alone and go nowhere, where the rest of the continent has not moved. So we seek to assist to develop center of excellence in terms of AI across the continents, and the letters to my colleagues have already gone out. So distinguished guests, the draft spectrum policy of South Africa proposes a sunset for legacy technologies such as 2G and 3G to ensure that all South Africans, including in rural and remote areas, are not deprived of new technologies such as 4G, 5G, and beyond. Therefore, as a country, South Africa is very interested in the outcomes of these conference discussions on the goal of a coordinated approach to spectrum management, given the different pace of technological development that is seen across Africa in areas such as 5G and others. I am informed that this spectrum management conference was preceded by a 2-day training workshop on spectrum monitoring hosted by the ITU and Policy and Regulation Initiative for Digital Africa, PRIDA. A high-level glance at your agenda reflects a balanced approach, and I hope that you will have informed presentation, panel discussions, and debates. However, as I look across this room, we have not done enough. We continue to exclude women, and young women in particular. We have not done enough to upskill women participation in the ICT sector. And our view is that we need to ensure the inclusion of women in the ICT sector in general and in the field of spectrum management in particular. So to you as senior managers and executives, I urge you to go out of your way and appoint females, in particular young women. You can work with institutions of higher learning to deliberately target young women and bring them as interns or through graduate programs. You train them and retain them, and it is in the best interest of Africa and in the best interest of the world to have women participating. So I will continue to advocate for women inclusion within the sector, even with my counterparts. Distinguished guests, as we prepare for the WRC-23, the workshop, and in particular this 7th Sub-Saharan Conference, will inform member states on the commercial and business imperatives which to consider as we develop and finalize our position as countries and develop common African positions for the WRC-23. While this conference is not a decision-making conference, it is important in sharing insight and informing us on the latest developments and market needs which are impacted by technology changes and spectrum allocations at the WRC-23. We should, as countries and as a continent, consider a balanced approach as we develop and finalize the common African positions for that important conference. However, as Africa, we may need to make unpopular decisions in the interest of our continent. The issue of the 600 megahertz spectrum is an important one that we will have to support if we have to achieve rural broadband connectivity for all in our continent. I am glad that the ITUR methods have to satisfy the WRC-23 agenda has taken into consideration inclusion for support of the 600 megahertz spectrum for IMT and mobile service broadband deployment. Allocating or identifying the portion of this band at the WRC-23 is important for our broadband deployment. And Program Director, it will be remiss of me not to mention that we are still celebrating the conclusion of the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference in Bucharest that elected the first African to the position of Director of Telecommunications Development Bureau, Dr. Cosmos Zavazava. I thought we should all clap. The development of the ICT sector is a key African policy, regulatory, and developmental agenda issue. And it is only fitting that the director of the ITU development sector comes from the African continent. I'm also elated to have borne witness to that election. It was not easy. It was not smooth sailing. There were attempts to divide us. There were attempts to conquer us, but we emerged. And therefore we mean it when we say that Africa will rise and reclaim its center stage in the world, and no one will dictate to us on how we must run our affairs or be caught wanting on issues of global importance. Also, South Africa was re-elected to the ITU Council for 2023-2026 period, and we shall continue to advance South Africa and Africa's priorities and relevance in this global space of the ITU Council. As I conclude, I must announce that South Africa is a signatory of the Harmonized Calculation Method Agreement for Africa, which will aid members to have common principles and perform cross-border frequency coordination and address interference amongst neighboring countries. As a signed member of this agreement, we urge other African member states to sign to strengthen our frequency coordination. And given that South Africa is a signatory of the agreement, and we have the capability, we have world-class and reliable data center, I'd like to announce that the Republic of South Africa is raising her hand to host the harmonized calculation software on behalf of Africa. And to the organizers, sponsors, delegates, and speakers at this conference, it will not be successful without your participation and attendance. But most importantly, do not forget to enjoy this beautiful city of ours, Cape Town. We call it the mother city. You must go to the sea. You should not miss a trip to Robben Island before you leave. And the restaurants serve fantastic and delicious food. So you better leave some of the dollars here. Thank you.
So, Minister Ntshavheni, thank you so much. And I think everyone will agree that was a fantastic way to wrap up this morning's session to the event. So really do appreciate you joining us for that and giving us those words. And yeah, really do appreciate that. And as I was saying at the start of this conference, to you and to everyone here in South Africa, I think on behalf of all the delegates, we do say a massive thank you for the great welcome that you have all given us to South Africa for this conference and to Cape Town. And I'm sure everyone will be doing exactly as the Minister says and enjoying some of the sights of Cape Town before they leave today. So thank you once again very much indeed. So that does wrap up this morning's session. So we now are going to be switching to lunch. So lunch is served in the same room as you had for the refreshment breaks today. If I could ask everyone to please try and be back here then for 2:10, where we're going to be having our next session, which is going to be looking at continuing the path towards a harmonized continental 5G strategy. Once again, thank you to the Minister, thank you to everybody for the speakers for this morning's session, and we look forward to seeing you all back here again in around about 45 minutes. Thank you very much.